First speaker, Bill Hanlon, followed by Jim Hyde.
At the last meeting of the City Council, a staff member gave a report on raising the rates for Bird-Tech. The staff person was 100% out of order to give justification for rate increase. It is the staff's job to give facts, nothing else. Of course, by giving justification, it may be thought that the report was slanted toward rate increase. Let's not forget, Bird-Tech is a huge dollar donator to the incumbents for re-election in the past. Bird-Tech had time to ask clarification question to the staff member, not the council. Question asked, answer given. Of course, none of the city council excused themselves from the vote because of possible influence. The vote was 100% for Bird-Tech. To those who see the world different, this may be called paying a political debt. When Jim Moffitt did exactly the same thing and asked for clarification of a number to the same staff member, he, with the stroke of a gavel, was told he must address the city council. The city council member told me I was a despicable, rotten old man a few years back. Yet the gavel was silent. The gavel was silent when a member of the city council said, "Vote for me," both during a city council meeting, truly using his political office to gain votes and directly against election laws, both federal and state. Get this, the sound and audio system is being replaced at city council chambers for the next 2 months. Instantly, $250,000 was found to replace the system. We were told that the system was old, but not that it was broken. Is this justification so that the public could not see those who speak at city council meetings on Wednesday nights? All the while, city council gave massive raises to the top management, the highest paid in our county. You also have to remember our city manager receives more money than the governor of California, while others of the city workers are denied raises for more than 4 years. This council allowed the abuse of a veteran in a wheelchair by code enforcement, allowed continual abuse of volunteers at the animal shelter for more than 2 years, allowed park bathrooms to be closed during negotiation with the equestrian community, and allowed Bird-Tech to give rate raises to everybody in our city, including senior citizens and the disabled. Do we need Jim Moffitt as mayor? You're darn right we do. We need unbiased leadership and a government in control, not the status quo protecting each other and huge political donors. I am Bill Hanlon of Rancho Cucamonga.
Susan McGuire, followed by Melissa Swiger.
Good evening. Let's start off with Councilwoman Williams. At the meeting before last, we were going on with the inner city engineer about how toxic the Red Hill Park water was in the pond there. I would like to know just how toxic it was. It was pumped down the drain. Did we pump toxic water back out into the ocean or somewhere else? Was it that toxic? If you're going to continue to say how toxic it is, I'd like to know just how toxic the water was you were flushing down the drain. According to the Daily Breeze, we paid $125,000 to have that water pumped from the park or the pond over to the drain, which I think is outrageous anyhow. But if we didn't know how toxic it was, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And another thing, Mayor, since 2005, people in the city have been waiting for their no-kill shelter, their animal shelter. We were promised that. We haven't gotten it. 2005 is coming on a long time ago. It's been 9 years. We have money for everything else, everybody's special little projects. Everything from your GSI to your new programming for your planning that the corporations find big and helpful. As Sam said when you brought it out in May. Well, those animals aren't getting any help. You're not doing anything to save them. And for over a year, I've been sitting here watching this council turn a deaf ear to the problems going on down there. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm tired of it. It's time you did something or go away. And Mr. Steinmetz, 2 years ago, some of my friends told me you were a good man. I should back you. And I did. I voted for you. Now that causes a dilemma because I don't know if they're senile or you're just a good con man. Because I believe you're an empty box trying to float to the top. That's the impression I've got watching you for a year. And I'm sorry, sir. I think we have enough empty boxes in Sacramento and Washington. We don't need any more. You've shown no backbone. You've shown that you can say one thing one day and turn around on that group on another, just for one. No, I'm sorely disappointed in you, sir. Thank you.
Melissa Swiger, followed by Vicki Roos. That's okay.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Melissa Schweiger, and I'm here to share a story about a Rancho Cucamonga resident and her experience with the Rancho Cucamonga Animal Shelter. In April 2014, senior resident Zilkia discovered her two beloved Pomeranians, Demetrius and Delilah, had escaped from their yard. Granted, she arrived at the Rancho Cucamonga Animal Shelter at 9 a.m., but Zilkia would have to wait until the shelter opened at 1 p.m. in order to see if her precious pups had been turned in. She was worried they were not there, though, because she was worried they were not, precious pups had been turned in. She was worried that they were not there, though, since her dogs were microchipped. And if the dogs had been brought to the shelter, surely she would have been called to tell that her dogs were there. After waiting patiently, Zilkia finally got to the front counter and knew one of the women at the front desk. You see, Zilkia is a longtime volunteer at the senior center in Rancho Cucamonga. And when the shelter employee saw her, she made a remark about two little Pomeranians that had been brought in and mentioned if they could be hers. Zilkia exclaimed yes, those were her babies and that both dogs were microchipped. She had the paperwork to prove it. However, the woman at the front desk said she didn't have time to scan the dogs and that Zilkia needed to pay the licensing fee as well as the pickup and impound fees for the dogs, which came to nearly $200. They scared Zilkia half to death by saying that the dogs could be adopted out after 3 days if she didn't pay the fees immediately. However, the law indicates that if a dog is microchipped, the shelter legally has to hold the dog for 10 days, but the intake cards for the two dogs indicated they would be available for review adoption after only 3 days. Zilkia was panicked and paid the fees in order to get her babies back. The whole ordeal left Zilkia feeling upset, and she reached out to Councilmember Bill Alexander to tell him what she had experienced. Councilmember Alexander had then reached out to members of that group, Together Helping Animals Thrive, to meet with Zilkia on June 9th. Zilkia showed all the paperwork and charges that she had received from the shelter. She had paid the licensing fees for both dogs and even had Demetrius neutered, and had an appointment scheduled for Delilah's spay for the following weekend. The paperwork revealed that the two dogs had been picked up a block away from their home, noted as stray field on the intake card. But there was no note that the animal control actually scanned the dogs to see if they had microchips. This is mandated by law that the animals are to be scanned when they're picked up. The shelter failed to scan the dogs when they were brought into the shelter that night. By impounding the dogs, the shelter now gets to charge the owner with the pickup and impound fee, and therefore make more money. This is not the first time the shelter has failed to scan the microchips, and distraught owners have addressed several cases at City Council meetings. Thank you.
Vicki Roos, followed by Allison Kreider.
Good evening. I'm going to continue the story. 2 days later, on June 11th, Zilkia contacted members of that group saying that Delilah was attacked while she was in the backyard and was badly injured. Zilkia does not drive, and her family would not help her with the dogs. So Susan Keithley picked up Zilkia and Delilah and took them to the vet. Delilah was diagnosed with a broken jaw and puncture wounds, causing the vet to think a coyote might have attacked her. The vet bill was estimated to be $1,200 to $1,500. Zilkia was devastated because she was on a fixed income and her family would not help her with the vet bill. She thought she would have to put her baby down. The vet said the dog had a good prognosis
and would not euthanize her, so Zilkia would need to turn the dog into the shelter to have it euthanized there. There was no way that group could let this sweet dog be killed. And we were determined to help Zilkia raise the money. Ontario Spay Neuter graciously gave us time to raise the funds and set the surgery date, as the time was of the essence. Dana Keithley, member of that group, set up a GoFundMe page on June 13th and shared it on Facebook. We even held a garage sale to raise funds. The support from the local Rancho community and beyond was unbelievable, and within 2 days, the vet bill was almost fully funded. Zilkia couldn't believe how many people wanted to help, and she was so happy that Delilah would get her surgery. However, on Saturday, June 14th, there was a knock on Zilkia's door. It was animal control, but they did not introduce themselves as being from the shelter. Instead, they said they were officers, causing Zilkia to believe they were police officers. They proceeded to fire off questions at her regarding the incident and asked her to provide proof of the rabies vaccine for Delilah. Zilkia brought out all the paperwork showing she paid the licensing fee. Zilkia thought Delilah had been giving a rabies shot from the shelter, since the shelter sold her the license for both dogs. However, the shelter did not vaccinate Delilah. Zilkia was supposed to have that done on her own, but she did not know that. This begs another question. Why is the shelter selling licenses when the dogs do not have a rabies vaccine? Rabies vaccines are required by the state of California. Licenses are not. Once again, the revenue. The shelter makes no money giving the rabies vaccine, but the shelter does make money with the licensing fees. Since Delilah did not have a rabies vaccine, the shelter put the dog on a 6-month quarantine hold, meaning Zilkia couldn't let her dog out of the house, and if she did, it was a $1,000 fine and possible misdemeanor. The animal shelter did this knowing full well that Delilah was in desperate need of her surgery, and they provided no alternative. Thank you.
Thank you. Followed by Dana Keithley.
Zilkia called that group in tears because she couldn't take Delilah for her surgery, which was set for the next day. That group called the vet at Ontario Spay and Neuter to explain what the shelter had done and asked the clinic to contact the shelter to tell them the surgery was scheduled and the dog needed medical attention. The shelter relented and allowed Delilah to get the help she needed. However, the shelter still has a 6-month quarantine hold on Delilah, who can't even go outside for a walk. It is suspicious that animal control showed up only after a member of that group posted the fundraising page, not after the initial incident occurred. In fact, a recent letter from Director Fincher regarding an inquiry by you, Mayor Michaels, into the handling of this matter reveals that the shelter lied about several occurrences. Shelter Director Fincher purposefully gave false information stating that the vet clinic contacted the shelter on June 14th to do a welfare check on Delilah, saying the owner canceled the appointment, which she never did. The director stated that the shelter's field officers immediately responded to the welfare call and quarantined Delilah, but encouraged the owner to get medical care. This is 100% false, and a signed letter from the veterinarian at the clinic states that they in fact called the shelter on June 12th to follow up on Delilah and make sure she would get prompt care or be euthanized there. But the shelter failed to do this, and then the director created an elaborate account to cover that the shelter still didn't do their job. It is more than likely the shelter went out to the owner's home after the fundraising page was posted and a member of that group's name was seen on the Facebook page by shelter staff and volunteers. It could have been pure retaliation, which we have shown occurred in the past. A public records request of Delilah and Demetrius' initial shelter intake revealed that the shelter actually changed the records after that group made the request. They changed the intake from stray field to stray OTC, which means over the counter. And why is the shelter altering their records after public records requests? This is very suspicious, but it's not the first time shelter records have been redacted under the leadership of Director Veronica Fincher. We dug a little further and noticed that the initial intake of Delilah and Demetrius had more to it. We did a records request for the police officer's report since Director Fincher said the shelter was too busy to pick up the dogs and had to send a sheriff's deputy to pick up the dogs. Well, guess what? After getting the records, it shows that the call came into the sheriff's office at 4:39 p.m., a deputy picked up Zilkia's dogs at 4:57, and the call was closed by 6:06, with the dogs being dropped off at the animal shelter. Now, what is interesting is that Director Fincher's letter to you, Mr. Mayor, states the call came into the shelter in the evening, and that the shelter had only one field officer on duty, which is why the deputy had to pick up the dogs. Ms. Fincher's letter states the officer was busy with another owner and group of people who was concerned about the return of her 3 dogs. Director Fincher...
Followed by David Dykstra.
Good evening, Council. I'm going to continue the story. Director Fincher failed to say that the group that was there to actually pick up the dogs was actually myself, Allison Kreider, fired employee Jesse Kreider, David Dykstra, and Andra Gilbertson. We were there to pick up her 3 dogs who had been impounded by the shelter. That's going to be for another story, though, that we'll get to probably within the next couple of council meetings. But basically everything that we have said we can post on our website. It's on thatgroup.info, and I have the copies here. And we can prove that Director Fincher has been fabricating those incidents, covering up for the fact that the staff is not doing the job that's mandated by California law, which is scanning for microchips. You see, our group didn't arrive at the shelter that day until about 5 minutes before 6 o'clock, because we were told if we were not there at 6 o'clock, which was still a whole hour before the shelter closed, Andra wouldn't be able to get her dogs back, and they'd have to be there another day. So we were making sure we were there by 6. Obviously, we would have to wait a while before we could talk to the field officer that was on duty. Andra had to pay charges, we had to do a few other things, and we have video and phone records to prove the timeline of our events. It was well after 6:30 p.m. before we could speak to the only field officer that was on duty that day, which was Heather Thomas. So why didn't she have time to go out and answer the call if it came in at 4:39 in the afternoon? And even if she was busy with something else, which wasn't what the director stated in her account to you, Mr. Mayor, there was nobody else in the building that could scan the dog for a microchip. The call closed at 6:06. The dogs were already in there, impounded in the shelter by the time we got there. So what was the field officer doing? What were the other 10 to 15 employees at the shelter doing that day? No other vet tech and staff member, again, was available to scan for a chip. The former vet, Dr. Tumoff, was there because we spoke to her right after we finished with Heather Thomas in order to discharge Andra's dogs that we had to get out of the shelter. So again, what was the field officer doing while we were speaking with the vet? Once Andra's dogs were actually released from the shelter, we left at about 7:20 in the evening. Again, why couldn't somebody have scanned for the dogs after we left before they closed? They basically made poor Zilkia waiting for her 2 Pomeranians. She had no idea where they were that night. They couldn't call and say, your dogs are here, you're going to have to wait until tomorrow to pick them up now. And they sat on this case for almost 3 hours. Another strange thing too is that Heather Thomas, the field officer, her initials actually are not on the ones that are on the intake card. It's actually Field Senior Officer Linda Wizarek. So was there really only one field officer on duty that day? I mean, we'll probably never know because we already know how independent investigations go with this city council. So instead of just taking literally a few minutes to scan these 2 dogs, they made Zilkia sick with worry, and they were also able to charge her that additional $84 for the impound fee for both dogs. Zilkia wanted to be here tonight, but unfortunately she wasn't feeling well or up to it. So we really hope that this situation can be resolved. Thank you.
David Dykstra, followed by Sandra Woolley.
to get Sylvia her money. What? Who was that?
Good evening, Council. My name is David Dykstra. I've been a resident of Rancho Cucamonga since 1975. Yesterday, the Federal House Oversight Committee questioned Secret Service Director Julia Pearson about the problems concerning the quality of protection and the alleged dereliction of responsibility by the world's top protective agency. She faced a committee that asked tough questions in order to try and gain insight into one of the worst security breaches in U.S. history. The following is an exchange between Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings and Director Pearson. I present this to you as a parallel to the chronic system-wide failure that is this council's oversight on the Rancho Cucamonga Animal Shelter. The following exchange is word-for-word testimony just over 24 hours ago. Elijah Cummings to Director Pearson. Director Pearson, I have thought about all of this long and hard, and I think my major concern goes to the culture. It is very disturbing to know that Secret Service agents in the most elite protective agency in the world feel more comfortable, apparently, from what I'm hearing, coming to members of this committee and telling us things instead of coming to you and members in the agency. That I'm telling you, when I boil all of this down, that to me is dangerous. It has to go against morale. I don't even see how good decisions can be made if your own people don't feel a level of comfort or they feel fear that they are going to be able to talk about the things that concern them. I just want to go through some questions, and I want to give you a chance to address that, because to me, when all of the dust settles, that's a problem. Now, Director Pearson, as a former field agent and now as the head of this agency, that has to concern you tremendously. Is that right, Director Pearson? Yes, sir, it does. It's unacceptable. Elijah Cummings. Does it trouble you that some of your own agents apparently do not feel comfortable raising security concerns? And this is just one person, and there are others who, again, would rather be whistleblowers, and again, I have no problem with whistleblowers. As a matter of fact, we do everything in our power to protect them. But this agency, if they'd rather be a whistleblower than to bring to you their concerns to you, you started off by saying that you're going to make sure this never happens again. Let me tell you what the problem is here. If you're heading an agency where the folks are not providing you with the information, do the right thing to make the changes, how do you even know what the problems are? Do you follow me? Help me with this. Director Pearson. Yes, sir, if I may. Anytime in any organization in which you start to make a significant changes, some people will have resistance, some will push back. However, I will continue to lead and transform the Secret Service to ensure that we are prepared for our mission and ensure that we can restore our reputation to the American public. Now, this is me. It is staggering to think that in this rare case, Congress could come together as quickly as possible and take the action necessary to remove a person who clearly was not the type of individual capable of running an agency of such responsibilities. This is a direct result of public pressure, outrage, condemnation by Americans who are embarrassed to have our reputations so sullied by such incompetence and worse nefarious practices. Thank you very much. Yes, sir, if I may. Anytime in any organization in which you start to make a significant changes, some people will have resistance, some will push back. However, I will continue to lead and transform the Secret Service to ensure that we are prepared for our mission and ensure that we can restore our reputation to the American public. Now, this is me. It is staggering to think that in this rare case, Congress could come together as quickly as possible and take the action necessary to remove a person who clearly was not the type of individual capable of running an agency of such responsibilities. This is a direct result of public pressure, outrage, condemnation by Americans who are embarrassed to have our reputations so sullied by such incompetence and worse nefarious practices. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Woolley, and I represent one of the commercial property owners in the city. It's a mixed-use office and retail center on Foothill. Every election season, our properties throughout the city, and I speak for other property owners as well, we're inundated with political signs littering our properties. Most of us don't think we have a choice. We drive into work the next morning and they're everywhere. Disrespectful, not appreciated, something has to be done. You guys have very strict, stringent rules and regulations for businesses that come into the city, for signage. It's costly, you have to go through the steps of permits, getting a rendering, getting permission from the landlord, permission from the city, but political signs, nothing. Anybody can throw up a sign, whether you're running for a city seat, assembly, senator, the president, or the Pope himself. The signs go up. So not only that, it's costly, they cause damage. You put up a sign on a light pole, you use the clear shipping tape, the sun melts the glue into the enamel, and it takes forever to get that off, and then there's damage. You've got to sand it and repaint it. It's costly. You nail up or screw up a sign to a big leasing wooden sign that we have on the property that we spend hundreds of dollars for. We have to pay to have those removed. 9 times out of 10, there's damage. This is unacceptable. It's rude, it's disrespectful to the property owners. We help support the city. We're supposed to be in a camaraderie with you guys. And you do nothing. And the little lawn signs, I can pick those up, throw them in the back of my car and dump them in the trash, and I'm happy to do so. And sometimes the property owner doesn't even like the person that's running for office, but all of a sudden he drives on the property and sees the guy's name there, or the woman's name. You know, so I think an ordinance should be established. And I probably don't have the time to go into the details of it, that of course code enforcement would have to oversee. But it's easy to do. Seems like trying to slay a dragon with a pea shooter, but it is possible. It's been a time-honored illegal activity to do this, but it's disrespectful. And you don't like driving down the street, especially Foothill, and see all these signs all over the place. And then to add insult to injury, after the election, they don't bother to come and take them down. And then the property owner has to have another cost, because when they take down the first sign 2 or 3 days later, the signs are up again. And so we're stuck.
Everyone. The Animal Shelter's Furry Friends Festival is lauded as the largest fundraiser of the year. And while it's great to raise funds, it seems that once again the shelter's homeless animals do not seem to be the priority. The event is not being held at the shelter, but at Central Park, which seems highly illogical. The event has always brought in a lot of foot traffic through the facility, looking at all the adoptable pets, which is one of the benefits of having this event there. Many residents and citizens from surrounding cities do not know what a shelter is, so this large event should be on-site showcasing the animals for potential future adopters. It has to create extra work to transport the animals that are lucky enough to be chosen to go. The firehouse open house is at the fire station. Why is the Furry Friends not at the animal shelter? But this event is about PR and raising money, which we've already shown for the past several years has not saved more animals from dying at the shelter. And shame on the council and the shelter for not having a full-time vet. That makes no sense. Speaking of PR, almost every day in my junk mail is your campaign ad, Mr. Steinhardt. Your business is advertising. Sell the product, good or bad. You say you have integrity, common sense, leadership. You'll fight in Sacramento. It's too bad we don't have the overhead. It's kind of convenient. In 2012, when you were running for mayor, you said, how much is politician Dennis Michaels' taxpayer finance pension costing Rancho Cucamonga? But I don't think you have voted any different since you've been on this council. And in this year's advertisement for campaign or for assembly, you show John Kennedy saying conformity is the jailer of freedom and the enemy of growth. For the last 2 years, we have been coming with records requests showing that this council and Director Fincher and Joe before did not follow the Nathan Winograd guidelines that you paid thousands of dollars for. And they're conforming, they haven't changed. We've invited you, unfortunately I know it's the same day as a fire open house, but we invited all of you to see Redemption, the film on how to be a no-kill shelter. It should be mandatory that you go, Mr. Gillison, that Director Fincher go. One of you go to represent. I mean, several of you should go. We don't have to be killing our animals. You can't say you have failed when you never tried, or you have failed because you never tried. Thank you.